Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here. So my name is Carly Hauk, and I'm moderating this wonderful topic. And I have never been to Transform. This is my first time, so really delighted to be here. And just a little bit about me. I have had the opportunity to support some wonderful executive teams at LinkedIn, Pixar, Capital One, Genentech, and have supported the strategy and delivery of global learning and leadership and talent development programs. I've also been a senior lecturer at Stanford University on leadership topics for about 10 years. And I wrote a great book on conscious leadership and business that debuted in 2021. And in all of these hats that I've worn, I really have a commitment to bring a space where we can all have these sometimes challenging conversations with empathy, with psychological safety, so that we can find healthy resolution. And that is the energy that I'm going to be bringing towards our panel today. And the topic that we have is, how do leaders address and navigate sociopolitical issues at work? As we know, what's happening in the world is actually impacting us in the workplace. And how we take a stance on that is going to impact our people. And so today, this is a really important topic, that we find different strategies and different tips. And you're going to be hearing from these wonderful leaders today on some of their experience and some of the solutions that they found. And so without further ado, I have Miss Courtney Basherzan, who is the Chief People Officer at Wikimedia. I almost said Wikipedia, but Wikimedia. And Courtney is committed to bringing liberatory practices of HR so that it works for everyone. And I have Amy Lentz, who is the Chief People Officer at TOMS. And Amy is always seeking to find harmony across diverse opinions. And then we have Brad Warga, and Brad has had the hearts and ears of many chief people officers and has been able to place them in some incredible roles in companies in his tenure at Heidrick and Struggles. And then LJ Brock is the Chief People Officer at Coinbase. And LJ is committed to creating the right type of culture and finding the right people to join Coinbase to fulfill their mission of economic prosperity? Freedom, thank you. I know I was close. So I am just delighted to have these incredible leaders and to be able to hear from their experience. So I'm going to start with Courtney. You had this incredible role at Google in 2020, and you were there even before that in 2018, and you were leading up the HR crisis management part of that organization. Tell me a little bit about what you learned about how to address sociopolitical issues at work.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. And I have to say a special hello to my mother. I'm a Vegas local, and she's come here to see me, so thanks, Mom. And thanks to my friends who are also here. I did have the wonderful opportunity when I was working at Google to start our crisis management office in the HR team. It was a team I had asked for years from our leadership. Initially, after a workplace shooting that took place that I was supporting, and it was a horrific experience, and the first time in my life where I was like, I am woefully underprepared for this moment as an HR professional. And I said, we need to have a separate body that's not an HR business partner to handle these moments. And I was told no. And then I kept asking and asking. And finally, in January 2020, someone called and said, hey, you want to start that crisis team we were talking about? We think this COVID thing's going to be a big deal. So we led the initial response to the crisis, which was a lot of work. And I learned so many things. Every Friday, I would write down my learnings of the week, and I probably have a book on that doc alone. I would want to say two things that I think you all are hopefully thinking about. One, you need a crisis team. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it an incident response team. whatever it is, you need to have that body in your organization. I don't care if you're 2 people or if you're 200,000 people, because the reality of our world today is that our employees are facing and living through pretty tough stuff. And whether you've told your people they can bring their full selves to work or not, they're bringing them. And so you need to be able to support them where they are. So have it, and have it before the crisis starts. Have it set when it's a non-crisis time so that you all are ready when the moment arises. That's the first thing. The second thing I'd say is if you have that already, and I hope some of you do, if you already have that function within your organization, really always be thinking about its evolution. So in the beginning of our time, really, we were literally trying to decide, how do we get people out of the office? How do we make sure everyone's online, get computers and screens to their houses? We got to a place, luckily, we were able to do what I call like the 2.0 of the work. Like, how do we embed our values in this moment? Instead of it feeling horrible, how do we make this an opportunity for our leadership team to get closer? Crisis is actually an opportunity. And I think when you have enough of the systems embedded, you can then start thinking about the opportunity from these moments. So I encourage you all to get one if you don't have one. But if you do have one, think about how you're transitioning it from a moment that is destructive to a moment that actually helps build.
Thank you so much. And as we know, it's only going to become more complex, more ambiguous. So really planning for the crises that are going to continue to emerge, I think, is so important. LJ, I'm going to throw it to you. So Coinbase has taken a certain stance on addressing sociopolitical issues at work, and I'd love for you to tell us what that is, and also how the ELT really found unity in that decision, because that's probably one of the hardest pieces, is how do we get the ELT on the same page?
Yeah, Dr. Seth, thank you for having us and hosting this panel. It's great to be here with everybody. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. So Coinbase in September of 2020 moved to a world that we defined as mission first. And what that meant for us on the back of what was obviously a really, really difficult year for the country, where we were all struggling with a lot to think about how we were evolving as a country. What we realized, and what does mission first mean for us, is that we had a very diverse employee base from a number of perspectives, certainly from a background perspective and where they'd worked and how they viewed different topics. And we saw some of the tension of that and different expectations of our employees on how we would handle that. And what we came to realize is that as an enterprise, the only thing every employee could be assured that the company shared the same values as them was about our mission and our commitment to economic freedom. And that was the one thing that we were going to take a stance on as an organization. It didn't mean we weren't going to support our employees individually, and we may talk about that later. It meant as an enterprise, we were not going to take stance on anything that was outside of achieving economic freedom and the role that crypto plays in that. To your question on how the executive team got to that moment, some really hard conversations is the honest answer. I mean, everybody was going through hard conversations at that period of time. I think the key thing that I would tell people here, if you're going to debate any side of where you want to take your company on, that is, you got to create a safe space at an offsite with just the executive team, and you got to be able to talk to each other about some things that you probably are uncomfortable talking about. And if your CEO has a really strong view, then you've got to be able to ask questions of that CEO and understand, can you support that view? Can you get behind it? Is it right for you? If it is, great. If it's not, you may have some hard moments that you have to make a choice on from a career perspective. But I think the way that we got there was, as we understood Brian's vision and as we understood that what he was trying to do was make sure we create a haven where our employees could focus on our mission, we all got really comfortable with his view on that, and we were able to go forth as one body and support it going forward.
Thank you so much, LJ. Okay, Amy, you're up. So being the Chief People Officer at Tom's, you were really helping navigate this global organization through COVID. Tell me how you decided to speak to that and what strategies.
Yes. Hi, everyone. How many of us are so tired of talking about COVID? I see hands. So when I thought about this discussion of empowering voices, what first came to mind was centering marginalized voices and approaching the COVID crisis was obviously not a small feat. Part of me feels like I'm going to preach to the choir for a second, but I had a lot of one-on-one conversations where people were saying, this is not a political issue. This is a human issue across the spectrum. My background, I've worked for Republicans, I've worked for Democrats. I, like Carly said, thank you, really prioritize how do we make that aisle between us a little bit smaller. And so as I worked with our CEO in approaching how we brought people back into the office, even for 1 day a week, are we going to require people to get vaccinated? It felt in Los Angeles County like we were not up against, but I was looking at all of our neighboring companies that were close to us. Every single company that I spoke to was going above and beyond what LA County was requiring. And so it was an unpopular stance to even consider not going above and beyond what was being required of us from the government. And so as I had one-on-one conversations with folks across the organization, can I have a confidential conversation? What are you going to do with this information? Please tell me you're not going to go to my boss on both ends. I'm going to quit if you don't do X. I'm going to quit if you do X. These are really difficult conversations to have. I mean, again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. All of us were impacted by someone falling really ill, almost dying. What are we going to do with such a diverse group of people and their thoughts? I empowered the voice of, as I would consider it, the very small minority of folks that felt unsafe to say, I won't get vaccinated. I'm not going to do it. Ethically, I don't think that's the role of a private company. And if you do that, I have to take a hard line. And I'm going, oh my gosh, if they leave, okay, if we do that. And then I talked to other folks, and it felt really messy. And in that, I took a stance in how we approached it to partner with my CEO and say, what you have to take a personal stance as our executive leader. It's on you. I can tell you what I think, but if we are we a regulatory entity or a governing entity? Are we going to go above and beyond what the government is asking? So he decided, we partnered and we all aligned as an executive team. No, we're not. We are just going to mirror what is expected of us and required by the law. In so many conversations, I did not represent my personal thoughts. And I'm sure every single one of you could think, oh, I bet she thinks this or thinks this. To be neutral is really brave in that kind of environment. And so I committed to every single person, this is a confidential conversation, and I will represent you just as equally as I represent the opposing opinion. And so we got a lot of internal feedback. You know, you think, what do we say externally? What do we mandate internally? And so the way we approached it was really looking at, what do we stand for? We give a third of our profits to mental health. What about the mental health of our staff? We are not going to bring harmony, using your word. We're not going to have harmony on this. So what are we going to do? So we said, let the government do what the government's going to do, but we are going to do that, and we are going to honor and really respect differing opinions. But instead of saying it's a safe space, we called it brave spaces. So we invited folks into those confidential conversations to be heard, and then we essentially said, we want to empower you to be heard, and then we want to help you decide if you want to stay with us or not. And so we had a resignation incentive program where if you gave, we still have it to this day, at least 4 weeks of notice, you got a third of your pay in addition to your regular pay during your notice period. That felt revolutionary at the time, but that's something that we did to build trust with folks. We really want to set you up for success if moving away from us is what's best for you.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I hear neutrality was really important, but also really listening to the most marginalized folks and making sure that everybody had choice in whether they wanted to stay or go.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Brad, on to you. And I have been seeing a lot of the questions coming in. Thank you so much for sending them. We are going to definitely pull some through, and we also have some other wonderful things to share with you. So I will do my best to get some of these voices from the audience in. So Brad, being that you have been a trusted advisor to so many CPOs, what can people leaders expect from the CEO around crisis management and these types of issues and employee activism?
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. I would say to all of you that work in HR in the room, you now have the second loneliest job in business behind the CEO. And that's a compliment, actually, because the difference in some of these issues and why I think we're talking about this is there's no right answer to many of these issues. And I remember when, back to the loneliest part of the job, I remember when LJ, who's been a good friend for a long time, came out with it. I called him and I said, oh my gosh, I don't think you're ever going to get a job again.
You said you'd never sit next to me on stage ever again.
And then literally a year later, people that took a hard stance against what Coinbase did had reversed and actually were starting to applaud some of it. So, and there's still, there's no right answer. People are on both sides of it. I think the change the CEOs want in the chief people officer role, and this is an overused term that I continually hear, is I need a first principle thinker. I need someone with the critical thinking, the creative problem solving, the agility to be my partner on these problems, because there is no playbook. There's no historical playbook anymore. And in fact, they kind of go away from people that had the playbook from some of the academy companies like GE and Honeywell and Disney that, if you're as old as me, you grew up with, because the world's just changed too much. And I think for some of you, that's probably really exciting because you've risen to be the closest business partner to the CEO that we've ever seen in this profession. For others, it's led to burnout. I can't tell you the number of operators who dropped out of roles because of the pandemic and because of George Floyd and because of all these issues that were just overwhelming and hard to decide what to do with. So there is good news in it, though. I think the function is becoming more strategic, and the evidence of that, at least in the tech world where I spend most of my time, is for the first time CHROs are now making more than CFOs. So the demand for your skills and your ability to help the organization navigate one crisis after another is, it's definitely keeping me in business.
Thank you. Thank you for your perspective. So I'm going to take one of the questions from the audience, and I actually really love this last one right here. So one question is, our CEO speaks publicly about some issues, but is silent on others. And where did that go? I just lost it. Hello, where did it go? It went too fast. There, thank you so much. I did not memorize that one. Okay, employees are starting to share the displeasure on engagement surveys. What can we do? Who wants to take this?
I'll start, because I think what I'm seeing my clients do is develop frameworks around what they're going to talk about. You can imagine that if you speak on one topic, you're gonna end up getting pushed to speak on all these topics, which then it becomes a full-time job, and that's not what CEOs are going to be willing to do. The most common thing we've seen is to take a framework, and I'll use abortion in Texas. So we had clients that did not want to take a stance either way on abortion, but what they did is they said, we need to talk about this because we have a site in Texas. We have employees in Texas. And so they came out publicly and they said, for any of our employees in Texas, we will pay for you to cross state lines and get medical care. And that is a benefit that we're going to continue to provide. Now that's a neutral comment, but we're seeing similar things with Israel and Palestine. I know that was a question on here. I mean, most people are staying in the neutral if they comment at all, but.
I would just say, I think you have part of the answer to that question in the question. So you have engagement survey data that's telling you have employees who are having problems with the way the CEO is operating. I can tell you that my way of thinking about how I would solve that problem is I would find what matters to your CEO. At Coinbase, what matters to our CEO is how our very top 25, 30% view how we're operating. I would correlate your survey engagement data on they're upset to that group, and I'd go say to them hey, you might drive out some of our best people. Well, how does that operate for you? And then you're going to get a North Star, right? You're going to find out either they'd rather still have that voice, in which case now you can be clear with your employees, right? You can go back and just transparency, give people the choice. Our CEO is going to do this. He's not going to change, or she's not going to change. You have to decide, do you want to be a part of it or not? Or the CEO is going to see the data that you already have and say, wow, I didn't realize I was doing that. Maybe I should change my approach. I don't want to turn off these people, right? So you've already got half your answer right there. You just got to connect the dots, is my advice.
I just want to add real quick that being neutral, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, because there's a lot of employee frustration with being neutral and unclear. Like, look at, how many companies said, we're remote first, and then they're literally 2 years later, everyone's back mandated. And then there's a bunch of people in the middle that are wishy-washy, like, well, we're not going to mandate it, but we strongly encourage you to come in. And like, employees don't care for that.
They really don't. Two things I'd say. One, and this was a little bit beyond the question, but one, I question whether or not your CEO should be the one making statements. And if they are, how often they are. One of the things that we do at Wikimedia, which is the organization which hosts Wikipedia, is spread across our leadership team who is responding to what. And it's not me as the Black woman responding to a Black issue and then the Muslim woman who's on our leadership team responding to what's happening in Gaza, for example. We really think about whose work is closest tied to whatever it is, and that person is the voice that's responding. So the energy is spread across the leadership team, which means a lot of people in an organization hate us all equally. Which is very hard. I'm being serious. One of my colleagues is here. She can attest to it. But, I think that's important, because there needs to be a shielding to a degree for our CEO so that she can go out and continue to do the work that she is doing. The second thing I would say is, I really agree with sort of the taking a stance and being clear about what we're about and what we're not about. What I think, as an organization, what I think is important to do is to try to shift the conversation for your people. So when they're coming and saying, we don't like this note, we don't like the way you use those words, there's a lot of wordsmithing going on from non-comms folks, I've been noticing. And that's fine. What I try to do is pivot the conversation to, do you see us taking the action? Because who cares what we say, actually? Who cares? I could say, I'm so against this, and if tomorrow nothing changes in how we operate, or how we show up for our customers, or how we show up for our broader stakeholder community, I actually don't think it matters. So pushing your employees to say, yes, hold us accountable to the words. If you don't like the fact that we used crisis and you wanted us to use genocide instead, okay, fine. But more importantly, hold us accountable to what we said we would do. Come back to us in 6 months and in 12 months and in 18 months and say, you said you were going to support these types of organizations, and we haven't done that. That's the work. And that's what I actually want our employees to be holding us accountable to.
Wonderful. I love that. Do you want to share anything else, Amy?
We can move on. I'm mindful of time.
Okay, great. This is a question that actually, Brad, you and I were conversing on, but I think it's really applicable to everybody here. So I'm gonna start with you and we can go from there. So have you noticed in your tenure a increase in just this generational change in employee activism?
I would say 100%. I blame Google for most of it. And I say that because in the early days of Google, and if you saw Brian Powers speak, he's a good friend, and he was there, and he would say, look, we needed our developers to come and work 14 hours a day. And the way to do that was keep them caffeinated, fill them up with food, do their laundry, let them drink alcohol at work at night, like whatever it took to keep them there, and then build beautiful facilities that are better than going home to your small apartment. So, and Google was very, very successful. Now they don't need people to do that anymore, where they still provide those benefits. It's pretty easy to see the jump from like the lack of separation between your personal and your professional life. If like you're dating people at work and you're having happy hour at work and they're doing your laundry, suddenly you start to go, okay, well, they should care about my civic issues. But Google's a for-profit company. It's not a civic organization. Everybody else is competing for those same people, and so they emulated what Google did. And so I think this is a bigger issue in Silicon Valley than probably the rest of the country, but it is definitely an issue, and the pendulum is swinging back. We also have a generation of the workforce that hasn't seen a correction in like 13 years. We went through a lot of them, and saw people get laid off. This is the first time that people are seeing that, and I think it's having a big impact.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in on that? The rise in generational change and employee activism? If not, I've got another one. Okay, ding, ding, ding. All right, I'll go to another one. So this one I'm going to direct at you, but anybody can chime in. So based on your experience at Google, kind of leading more of this crisis management, if all HR functions are going to actually implement more of this, what is a strategy that you might encourage to really make sure that HR is prepared for crisis, and even more prepared that folks have the training to be trauma informed?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of the things that HR folks can do to be prepared is to enable your teams to have their skills be fungible. Because one of the biggest problems in crisis is that we still need to cut paychecks. We still need to administer benefits. People still need to do the core work of HR. So the question becomes, who can divert their attention and energy to these other things? And that number gets small when your benefits person can only do benefits. So the more people are able to move across the HR teams and work so that you can free up those resources in necessary moments, the more likely it is that you're going to do the work the best. On the trauma-informed point, I think there's been a paradigm shift talking about generational changes that Brad was just talking about. I was alive and working when PTSD was strictly used for soldiers. There was a strict application of that terminology, and to use it in any other context was viewed as inappropriate. Now, people have a bad meeting, and they say at the next meeting, I'm experiencing PTSD. I don't have an opinion on that. But what I do know is that mental health is a fundamentally different conversation than it was even 10, 15 years ago in the workplace. And I think we have to, whether we agree or disagree, understand that many people do feel like they are suffering through trauma, and that the workplace is often a site of trauma for many people. And so for leaders, particularly HR leaders, but leaders as a whole, to be trauma informed, I think is critical in these moments so that you can recognize what you're seeing people express and address it as such. When we are addressing people expressing trauma as a policy problem or a process problem, we're not solving the problem. And so the identification of saying, what I'm hearing these people say is actually a traumatic response to something that's happening in the outside world. So me writing a letter is not going to change that. However, me finding resources that support these people in their mental health might change that. That's a fundamentally different response pattern, but you need to be able to see the difference between the two.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add, she's got far more depth in this. I think the one thing that we've done, and I think CHROs and HR leaders could think about, is we have tackling, Brad, you were talking about this before, we've brought internal communications together with HR, works and actually under the same leader. So my HR business partners and our internal comms team work together. And I think what that's enabled us to do is that connection, to Courtney's point, we got that connection happening all the time, not just when there's a crisis moment. And so when there is a crisis moment, the free flow of how we work, how we engage with our employees, how we sort of help them get through that is a lot less friction than I think I've talked to other peers. So it's not that you have to go in and demand to reorg, but I do think that you should be looking to connect the key parts of your HR team with your comms team, particularly whether you're remote first, hybrid. In today's world, it's all the more important since you're probably not all going to be in person when these moments happen.
Thank you. So I'm aware we have about a minute left. Amy, is there any tip you want to leave folks with as part of the closing, just to walk away with?
Sure. I was thinking about when you said wordsmithing and focusing on, a lot of the times people get down to the nitty-gritty details and they want to be heard. It makes me think about how we addressed what's going on in Israel right now and Gaza and Hamas. And we had our CEO send an email, a lot of talk about who sends it, what do we say, do we address it internally, externally? And there was a staff member who joined shortly before, full onboarding experience. They joked that they were inundated with Lattice engagement surveys, and because of that, they felt like their voice could be heard. And so what I would leave with you is consider an engagement tool where from day one, your people feel like their voice is heard. And what they ended up doing is they approached the person that managed internal communications, also on the people team, and they knew who managed internal comms, reached out to them and said, I don't feel comfortable with this communication from the CEO. And they had a conversation. They felt safe to approach the CEO, and I got a phone call right away. Hey, Amy, I got this email. What do I do? This is what I want to do. Great, we're aligned. They had a meeting, they disagreed, and both of them walked away feeling all the more connected. And so we had someone who felt safe, went all the way to the top of the org. And so I would just leave you with really considering tools that empower the voices of your people. Yeah.
Thank you. And in our closing, I want to just share that we know that this is a very big conversation and that we've just kind of scratched the surface. Our panel of speakers have actually been invited to join the Transform Plus community and to have a second conversation together on the virtual platform. So that hasn't been scheduled yet, but that's coming. So you'll be able to engage with us again on this topic. And I love what you just said, Amy, because that's the vision of the workplace that I see, is that we are empowering all voices, but empowering leadership to really create the space to have these kinds of conversations where people agree to disagree, but we still find healthy resolution. And the truth is that most folks in leadership roles have not been given the skills or the training to actually be showing up on stage like these incredible leaders. And when there are budget cuts, that's getting cut. But I don't think most leaders actually know how to be the kind of leader that our world needs now. The responsibilities, the kind of integrity. And so that's a conversation I would love to continue, whether it's here at the conference or, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure these leaders would also love to talk about it. I'm going to be over in the speakers lounge afterwards, since I know they're going to rush us off stage if anybody wants to talk. And this was so amazing to get to talk with all of you. Thank you for sharing your experience. And thank you all for your attention and coming. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everyone.